Dear friends, I'm delighted to salute you in our discussion today within the framework of scenario building events on Eastern Partnership for the next 10 years. Our think tank, Topchubashov Center, together with Visegrad Insight and the Black Sea Trust for Regional Cooperation, offers an online discussion. The recent Karabakh war has established a new geopolitical landscape in South Caucasus. But its post-war influence may have far-reaching effects and extend beyond the Caucasus toward the Black Sea region. Today, we are going to discuss the post-Karabakh security architecture in the Black Sea Basin, or if we broaden this region, Black Sea and Caucasus region, the opportunities and challenges many involved countries can face. We have interesting key speakers today, Mr. Ayaz Rzayev, Research Fellow from Topchubashov Center, and Mr. Fuad Chiragov, Head of Department from the Center of Analysis of International Relations, both based in Baku, Azerbaijan. The discussion will be moderated by me, Rusif Husseinov, also representing Topchubashov Center. We'll have an hour discussion, which will be followed by a Q&A session, during which our attendees can raise their questions. They will be asked not only in English, but also Azerbaijani in Russian. There have been much talk recently about the changing geopolitics in the Caucasus since the Karabakh War, which definitely has an impact on the Black Sea Basin, as I already said, and will probably influence the developments in the region for the next few years. Ayaz, how do you analyze these developments? What kind of configurations do you expect or would promote?
Thank you, Rusif. The 44-day war and the deal signed on November 10th fundamentally changed the political reality in the South Caucasus. Azerbaijan's victory in the war, Turkey's more active engagement in the region, Russian peacekeepers in Karabakh, and the prospect of Zangezur corridor that will connect Azerbaijan with Nakhchivan and Turkey via Armenia, as well as potential for unlocking all other transportation and communication links in the region, pose a question for the regional countries of how effectively utilize the capabilities these countries have to maximize their security while navigating the complex regional environment they face and deal with expanding internal and external challenges in the new context. And in this context, one of the most important moments is building a new security community in the Black Sea region. And building a security community in wider Black Sea region that includes Georgia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, as well as external actors like Turkey and Poland, which are also members of NATO, could help these countries to maximize their security and use their relative capabilities to optimize their gains from this new configuration in the region. Security community does not mean an advanced alliance among all members of this community or having a common external threat. For instance, it's obvious that for Ukraine and Georgia, Russia is a #1 threat, while Turkey and Azerbaijan have way more complex, complicated, and nuanced relationship with Russia. So if it's not about common threat, what is the security community could be truly about? This security community, this potential security community that I'm talking about, has an external and internal dimension. We know that nowadays a new political equilibrium is emerging all over the world. And it's not the complete transformation of the international system, but it's transformation within the liberal system itself. And these transformations are very cardinal. And unfortunately, countries like Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Ukraine cannot shape their security environment, but they can greatly influence it. Traditionally, Black Sea is the region in which the interests of great powers cross and clash, both politically as well as physically. And building this community, security community, can help, first of all, to helps these countries to secure themselves from these changes, and second of all, to maximize their gains from these changes. And building this security community can certainly help these countries to contribute their own concepts, visions, and goals within the ongoing process of regional transformation and influence an emerging new power equilibrium in the region. But to be able to influence these processes, you need to form an area of some cohesion, stability, and common purpose. If you want to be able to influence the process of political configuration, you also need to be able to build a lasting and sound cooperation with regional countries, which is not easy feat. Enhancing physical and digital links as well as trade ties across the region is a geoeconomic struggle over norms, standards, and rules. It's also a geostrategic struggle for the control and use of regional supply and value chains. And in order to be able to win in this kind of environment, you need to cooperate. And this security community can greatly enhance cooperation capabilities and cooperation between all these countries. And of course, engaging countries like Turkey, external actors like Turkey and Poland, this also gives regional countries additional security guarantees, which also helps to the cooperation process. And this brings also us to the second dimension of the emerging security, of the potential security community in the Black Sea region. And this is how cooperation could help these countries to increase trust between each other. We know that the nature of international relations is anarchical by default. Yeah? Anarchy leads to uncertainty and mistrust between the countries. And the main goal of international organizations was to diminish this mistrust and bridge the credibility gap between the countries. But unfortunately, international organizations have largely failed to do so. For instance, we've seen this with pandemic and the actions of WHO, World Health Organization, initially didn't help to build trust or to enhance trust towards this international organizations. So international organizations largely failed to bridge the credibility gap and enhance trust between the countries. So this function now, these security communities can fulfill this function that international communities have international organizations, have largely failed to do so far. So as I said, this type of security communities, they can help to promote cooperation between the countries and do what international organizations are incapable or very slow of doing. There's also flawed understanding about the nature of cooperation itself. It's assumed that cooperation is the product of more trust. For instance, countries trust each other and they start cooperating. But actually, it's not always true. Sometimes, and most of the time, actually, trust is the product of more cooperation. The more you cooperate between each other, the more you trust each other. And this cooperation doesn't necessarily have to involve all spheres, like security, economic, politics. We know that Georgia, Ukraine, Turkey, Azerbaijan can have diverging political, economic, and security interests, but they can compartmentalize these issues. They can cooperate on those issues that makes much sense, that they can build some common understanding around, and they can put aside those issues that they have divergent interests or not yet see eye to eye in those areas. So building cooperation will also increase mutual trust between regional countries as well. So it's also building this security community in the region after the Karabakh War will help to discover new areas of mutual interest as well. nowadays we have between countries, there are very narrow areas of mutual interest, like Ukraine, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. They have the issues regarding their territorial integrity and separatism and foreign occupation. But this is just one area of mutual interest. There can be new areas, and to discover this, you need to cooperate. And this security community in the wider Black Sea region can greatly help us.
Thank you, Ayaz, for this comprehensive analysis. For those who have joined our webinar after we started, let me announce once again that we are discussing the post-Karabakh security architecture in the Black Sea Caucasus region. And our first key speaker, Ayaz, has just addressed the changing paradigms in the international system and the areas that can be common that can be of common interest to the regional countries. In order to facilitate our discussion process, I would kindly ask the attendees to type their questions if they have any, so that we can raise them after the core discussion is over. In recent years, Turkey has also risen as a key actor in several neighboring regions, including the Caucasus and Black Sea basin. What role can Turkey assume in the geopolitical developments in the region? Fuad, what is your take on that? And how do you think, can any change in Turkey's leadership affect Turkish assertive foreign policy in the coming years?
Rustam, thank you for your question. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you for all who organized it, who made possible this event to happen. Ayaz drew a very good general framework. I think it will be very easy for me to build on. He mentioned the importance of the cooperation, importance of the rivalry, importance of the new equilibrium. Your question is very good and very timely. Yes, Turkish foreign policy in the region has become very assertive and proactive. Results of the Second Karabakh War are very good indicators of the Turkish proactive foreign policy and the changing geopolitical landscape on the ground, and how balance of power is changing in the region. Actually, we had two realities. The reality that had been before September 27 of the last year, which when the Second Karabakh War erupted, which was based on and constructed on the balance of power after 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union. And most often, previous reality was called status quo, and everybody saw that it would not change soon. And now we have a second reality after trilateral ceasefire agreement in November. Turkey was not officially part of the trilateral agreement, but Turkish foreign policy and determination played significant role in recent changes. I'm a foreign policy analyst already 10 years. In the past, before that I was a lecturing. I remember my numerous number of informal conversations during the coffee breaks with experts and colleagues from different countries, from the United States, West, Israel, and Russia, and others. I remember my colleagues often were smiling with skepticism when we talked about possible Turkish role, supporting the resolution of the conflict, or whether Turkey alone, without its NATO allies, can stand against Russia or work with Russia on Azerbaijan and Armenian conflict. Indeed, it's the first time after 1991 when Russia admits a country which is a NATO member, by the way, to be player in the affairs of the former Soviet Union. As we know, this region was always Russian foreign policy priority, and Russian foreign policy was always jealous, not other players playing in this region. What we see is that the construction of the new balance of power, as Ayaz mentioned it, or equilibrium in the region. The former equilibrium was changed mostly, but of course not only with the Turkish foreign policy. So answering your question about role, what role can Turkey assume in the region? President Aliyev, in the beginning of October, during his interview, said that Turkey is playing a stabilizing role in the region, or stabilizator, says this phrase. And I very much agree with this definition. At the same time, I think this definition is set mostly in terms of the security dimension. Therefore, this is not only role Turkey assume or potentially might play in the region. I think Turkey also can play a transformative role in the region, the role of economic locomotive or driver that enable economies of the region to be integrated to each other and at the same time to the world economy. We have basically three regional powers that have been historically competitive in the region: Turkey, Iran, Russia. And I think if we analyze the economies of these three countries, we find out the following things. Unlike Iran and Russia, firstly, the Turkish economy are more, I would say, healthy economy, vibrant, growing, diversified, and more importantly, not resource-based. The Turkey is an energy deficient country, unlike Russia and Iran. Therefore, Turkey's economy is not very much competitive with the other energy countries of the Caspian Sea, countries like Iran and Russia. The Turkish economy and the economies of the region complete each other. They do not compete with each other. They complete. The Turkish economy, despite the problems of the recent year, is more complexly interconnected and linked to the world economy. The Turkish economy is more free market oriented, and rule of law is better than other historical rivals in the region. In other words, Turkey might, and I think already start to play the role of the West was supposed to play in the region. Just one example. Last year, the Georgian company Ajara Textile started to build a factory which will create 4,000 jobs. It's a very significant number for Georgian economy. The production of the factory is 100% is export oriented. In this factory, global brands like Nike, New Balance, Under Armour, or other brands will be produced. Why this factory is interesting? First, the materials for the production will be brought from Turkey. As we know, the strengths of the Turkish textile industry. And the second, these factories are built in Georgia because they just could not place the whole production level in Turkey. In other words, what we see is that it's not just of the export of products from Turkey, but export of the production cycle from Turkey to Georgia. And it's in these terms, Turkish economy, Turkey is in a unique position. Or we can point out the second example. I think it's very also important. As we know, Ukraine inherited from the former Soviet Union very strong and very substantial military industrial complex, institute, factories, and specialists. And almost for 3 decades, except a few of them worked. For the second time, that complex was seriously damaged after 2014 events, after war and problems with Russia. That military industrial complex for many years waited for modernization. People waited to start their job. Many people lost their job. So it seriously hit the Ukraine economy. And this industry waited for modernization, investment, for adjustment for the new realities. The West did not do it. Now you can find the news how in the recent years, the Chinese attempted to acquire these very critical industrial objects and factories in Ukraine. So I think it's not in the interest of the West. It's not in the interest of the Washington, United States as well. It will be more interested if Turkey comes and uses this, makes investment. Now what we see is that Turkey is with its investment comes to Ukraine. They start to build joint production in this field, and you can find more info in news about it, about the details. So unlike all the regional powers, Turkey is interested in open markets, free market and open communication of infrastructure, because it's confident in its competitiveness. So it's confident that it can win with these rules easily. Here I bring your attention the article about the opening of communication between Azerbaijan and Armenia, the Zengezur corridor, which Ayaz mentioned. According to a trilateral agreement signed between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia on November 2020. So also you can find thousands of scholarly articles written recently about the changes in socio-demographic structure of Turkey in recent decade, how these changes influenced Ankara's assertive and independent foreign policy in its neighborhood. In order to understand all this, I suggest to read about the Anatolian tigers, its growing role in domestic and foreign policy. These Anatolian tigers and the interests are drivers of the Turkish foreign policy. So here I come to the last and most important part of your question, whether any change in the leadership of Turkey might affect a certain foreign policy of Turkey. According to what I said, according to my understanding, the answer definitely is not. Is definitely no. There might be some changes, but these changes would be very superficial, and fundamentally nothing will not change. So we have a very unique historical momentum in the region, and Turkey as a unique position. You know that in 19th century, in 18th century, Turkey did not play as a modernizing power in the region. It was Russia. It was Russia was the more Western, more modernized. It has more modern army, which on the battlefield they won thousands of times Ottoman army. But in this case, what we see is that Turkey is a more modern regional power in the region. That's all. I believe I could answer your question.
Thank you very much, Fuad, for this interesting analysis. You explained how growing Turkish economy is and will be the key driver for Turkish geopolitical ambitions in several regions, several neighboring regions, including the Caucasus and Black Sea, and how this regional power is currently building its political, economic, and military partnerships with some regional countries. Again, to our attendees who joined later, let me announce once again that this webinar is being organized by Topchubashov Center and supported by Visegrad Insight and the Black Sea Trust for regional cooperation. Ayaz, let me then turn to you again. We've been discussing a potential configuration or alliance, if you want, in the Black Sea region, multilateral platforms, Guam Plus-like constellations, and you also mentioned the states which can be involved in this type of alliance. What about the external powers? Which foreign powers can be in favor or against such a constellation? And what type of support or obstacles can they create? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rusev. It's mainly, if we talk about external actors, we have to talk about great powers and how they see this new regional configuration. And in this context, we have to understand that all the Central Eurasian region stretching from Eastern Mediterranean to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, with the South Caucasus at the center, increasingly emerges as a single and very complex playing field for great powers. And why it compounds to a single region? Well, because physical and commercial connectivity increases, and it, let's say, erases this division to sub-regions. So if we want to look at the Black Sea region, we also have to look at the Eastern Mediterranean, to the Caspian Sea region, and also to the Baltic to the lesser extent. As I said, all of this Central Asian region, it emerges as a single, very fluid, very complex playing field for great powers. And here, China and Russia and their respective projects of regional and continental integration, the Eurasian Economic Union on the one hand and the Belt and Road Initiative on the other, not only interact but increasingly challenge Western economic and political interests in this, extended European neighborhood. But this is just part of a problem. The other element of this problem is that there is no common voice or common understanding or common vision of common interest in this region among the Western powers themselves. For instance, Britain sees this region and the playing field differently than France. France sees it differently than the US. The US sees the region differently from Germany. And all of this, of course, complicates already complex situation in the Central Eurasian region as a whole, and Black Sea region in the narrow sense. So all of this, of course, raises important and critical questions of how regional countries should conduct themselves, how they should construct their foreign policy, how they should engage Western countries, which Western countries they should engage most, and which Western countries they should engage least, or have a different, strategy toward them. And if this is about Western, how the West sees the region and the complicated situation there, but there is also this complicated situation about Russia and China and their interest in the region as well. Particularly China attempts to penetrate Europe's regional value and supply chain, which is very important in order to create its own production network in this space between Black Sea and Central Eastern Europe. Yeah, and we've seen this tension between Eastern European countries and China emerge just recently, whereas Germany and France, to a lesser extent, have slightly different, let's say, slightly different attitude toward China than these Eastern European countries. All of this, of course, complicates the situation even more. And there is another problem with the West. It's that the Western countries have this foreign policy strategy that was designed during the Cold War. And during that time, it was very effective. And Henry Kissinger, for instance, he was one of the main political figures who designed this kind of foreign policy, that you use cooperation in order to have some concessions from the other side. So cooperation as a tool. This is one thing. The second thing is that Europe, not just Europe, but the West usually likes to compound all the issues and strives for a grand bargain to resolve many disputes in one bold stroke, but this doesn't usually work. You have to, the West, in order to be more active in the region, and we want Western more constructive engagement in the whole Black Sea region, the West should learn how to compartmentalize issues. Where they can build a constructive, cooperative environment, they should engage more. If the issue is more complicated or it cannot be resolved right away, it should be put aside for another time maybe, or to be built an alternative venue to try to resolve these issues. But unfortunately, right now, the West doesn't. It doesn't seem that the West and the US in particular wants to pursue this kind of policy. When they compartmentalize issues, they have more flexible attitude toward the regional countries, where they enhance, they support cooperation, not just to gain some concessions from these countries, but just cooperation for the sake of it, to increase trust between the countries, to increase their overall security and their all sustainability and resilience. And we need this kind of policy from the West. Unfortunately, we haven't seen this until now. It's a bit messy, it's convoluted, it's too many issues put together and trying to solve them. And I don't think that it will be effective. So if the West wants to engage the region more effectively, more efficiently, and especially if the US wants to contain Chinese, inroads toward this Central Eurasian region, yeah, the West should be more pragmatic, be more flexible, and try to resolve things gradually, not to compound problems. Right now, we don't see this. Another problem that I want to mention about the Western attitudes, as I said, many different Western actors have different attitudes toward the region, especially toward the Black Sea region. But the problem is that if we look at these actors and we take, especially the EU, the EU's attitude towards the region is even more complicated, because there has to be some strategic response, to the inroads that Russia and China make in the region. They want to enhance their presence in the region. So there has to be some strategic response. But we don't see this response from the EU. Most documents, most strategic like strategies the European Union adopts, they become either too abstract or they become very technical documents that go nowhere. So striking the right balance is very important, and we should encourage the West to develop this kind of pragmatic, flexible strategy toward the region, and we should encourage the Western engagement in the region. So that's my 2 cents to this, to your question.
Thank you very much, Ayaz. I would encourage our audience to type their questions if they have, because after the core discussion is over, we can also address those questions. Another important link in the constellations that can be formed in the broad Caucasus Black Sea region could be Georgia as a linking bridge between the regions. Fuad, what can Georgia contribute to, and how can she benefit from such a configuration if it ever rises? What trajectory will Georgia's foreign policy pursue in the coming years? What is your take on that?
So thank you again for the question, Rusif.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I see we have some attendees from Georgia as well, and I think your question will be especially of interest to them.
Thank you for the question. Before beginning to answer your question, I would like to mention about very important issue that Ayaz underlined. I think which will be very important for me as well to answer your question. So he mentioned about that. I just took the note. The West should adjust foreign policy, and its foreign policy obviously is outdated. We can understand it not only from how they approached the Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict in the past, but how they approached the Georgia as well. I believe our conflict with Armenia, as well as the Georgian case, demonstrate that the West was impotent in the past and unfortunately continues to be impotent, and West EU should be more pragmatic and more flexible in its foreign policy. And Ayaz mentioned about the strategic response. I would add to this strategic responsibility the EU and West should also have. But answering to your question, so what we see in Georgia since May 2018 is that this country has been experiencing a chronic and permanent domestic political crisis, mass protest almost every month, polarization of the political spectrum. It's not just a way of the democracy, but it's what we see is that the political system, unfortunately, is very polarized, and it's actually, it's my personal view. It doesn't represent the institution that I work. It's a chronic problem. This problem has a geopolitical dimensions as well. The recent elections did not solve the problem. Since 2018, Georgia had 4 prime ministers and maybe 5, 6 cabinets. What we see in Georgia is that external forces are, along with the domestic polarization and problem, are doing their best using information warfare and different provocation to spoil relations of Georgia with Azerbaijan and with Turkey. And the central argument of this information warfare is that as if Azerbaijan is occupying the eastern part of Georgia, Turkey is occupying the western part of Georgia. They even coined the meme word Sokartvelo. In Georgia, they call the country Sakartvelo. So the main oil company of Azerbaijan is Sokar. So the main exporter of the oil and energy to the Georgia is Sokar company. So they use this similarity and coined the word Sokartvelo. Well, I would like to bring to your attention that, to the attention of our Western colleagues, that in Georgia, the same forces that promote classic anti-Western propaganda inflame also they also at the same time inflame also anti-Azerbaijan and anti-Turkish sentiments. They are behind engineering different crises in Georgia. For example, in the beginning of this year, we had incidents between Muslim and Christian Georgian in the western part of Georgia, targeted indirectly to the Turkey. At the same time, incidents in the south of Georgia, where ethnic Azerbaijanis live. Or in 2019, right in the middle of the political crisis in Georgia, on the border of Azerbaijan and Georgia, we had artificially inflamed incident of a historical monument church, which we call, Azerbaijan called the Keshikchita, Georgian called the David Garejin. If you go even deeper, you can find in the problems, geopolitical dimensions related to the construction of the Anaklia deep sea port. So how it's evolved in recent years, what did that port could play, might play in Georgia's foreign policy and strategic importance. So I leave it to your research, so you can go and find and read about this very important issue. Obviously, Georgia is very strategic country for the whole region. Georgia played significant and I would say only gateway for Azerbaijan and its energy resources to the world market, as well as for Turkey, as well as for the West in reaching South Caucasus and Central Asia. But what we see in Georgia after 2020 November is that some forces influence idea that Georgia is going to lose its gateway, or even some argue that Georgia will be isolated. Thus, they, I believe, subtly, surfacely suggest the idea of opening railway, for example, from the occupied Abkhazia to Armenia. So this railway was closed because that region was occupied. It's not under control of the central government of Georgia. So since 2012, they have been information attacks, testing the impulses and reaction of the public. How would they approach to this problem? So what we see is that along with Zengezur corridor, that Russia is interested and pushing for opening Abkhazia, the railway from Abkhazia, in order to increase its influence on the region. To my Georgian friends, I would say that don't buy this speculation and propaganda about that Georgia is going to lose its strategic importance. No way. There are already built energy infrastructure that operates successfully. And in order to change this, it will take billions of dollars and time and resources in order to change this. So Georgia will maintain its strategic importance. So I wish that this political crisis in Georgia will end soon. But in order to successfully finish all this, finalize this political crisis in Georgia, the West, I believe, should take strategic responsibility. Again, Georgia paid us, I believe, huge price for its foreign policy aspirations. But what we see is that the West hasn't responded adequately to the to the Georgian aspirations. So also the West should take into account that how the West, the behavior of the Western and approach of the Georgia is a good indicator, an example of for the other countries, whether they will be more thinking about close cooperation with the West, or abstain or take the reversal. I think I could answer your question. If there will be another question, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you a lot, Fuad. Indeed, we have several questions, interesting ones. Before jumping into the question part, let me remind once again that our webinar today has been possible thanks to our cooperation with Visegrad Insight and the Black Sea Trust for Regional Cooperation. In the chat section, you can find a link to the 2030 scenarios for the Eastern Partnership initiated by Visegrad Insight. Now, there are several questions which I'd like to address now. Ayaz and Fuad, you have already covered Turkey's rising role in the region as a key actor, which is interested in building its own gravity center. Any regional bloc initiated by Turkey may or probably will contradict Russia's national interests in the post-Soviet space. How can Russia respond to any Turkish-led developments in the region? Who wants to answer? Okay, Fuad, you go ahead.
So the Turkish-Russian relations are very interesting. I think, and I believe that it will be very good case studies for future students of the international relations. So basically, traditionally, when we study foreign international relations, we look at the things from realist theory or the liberal theory. But in all these cases, we will think that we see that all these theories sometimes fail to explain the essence of the relations. So there is another theory in international relations, which is called complex interdependency theory, which means that which means that these two countries, the big powers, the regional powers, cooperate in some areas, but at the same time compete with each other on the other side. For example, a couple of days ago, we watched how the leaders of the Turkey and Russia launched a foundation of the Akkuyu atom station in Turkey. A couple of days after that, what we see in Syria, that how, for example, Russian airplanes bombed the positions of the groups which were allied, which were controlled by Turkey. Or what we see is that growing economic relations with Turkey. At the same time, we see that Turkey's principal position on the Crimea, that Crimea belongs to Ukraine. As I mentioned in my speech, Turkish investment in military industrial complex of the Ukraine and close cooperation. So we see that this unique, very interesting interdynamics. So both parties play their role. They are interested in cooperation, but at the same time they compete, sometimes subvertly fight in other fronts.
I appreciate your answer, Fuad. Is there anything you'd like to add, Ayaz? Then, if not, then let me address the next question to you, because Fuad has already covered how the West was supposed to take more responsibility toward those countries which had been pursuing pro-Western policies, but we've seen so far the failure of the transatlantic community to do so. So against the backdrop of this failure, to what extent can regional countries be interested in deep strategic cooperation with the West? Because what the Western failure, when we speak about the Western failure, we usually point out to security dimension, but there are other aspects of bilateral or multilateral cooperation, such as human rights, free market, and so on. Ayaz, the floor is yours.
The system that we live in is called liberal international system, and it's led by the US. All this talks about, liberal system collapsing or decaying is very exaggerated. What we see now, actually what started during the Obama administration, then accelerated during the Trump administration, and will probably continue during the Biden administration, is not the collapse of the system, but it's change of the international system itself. It's changes within the system, but the main elements of the system, liberal elements of the system, are still there. So that's why human rights, free election, democracy are very important. They are basic elements of the liberal system. And as I said, it's not the main problem. The main problem is that this tendency of the West and the US itself, which this is a legacy issue. Yeah, this is a bug in the system that that traces its history back to the Cold War era, when you try to resolve all the issues at once with one bold stroke, or you use cooperation to get some concessions. This won't work. You have to address all these issues: free elections, democracy, human rights, or as well well as economic ties, you have to compartmentalize all these issues. You have to put them in their own boxes, and you have to resolve them by case by case, focusing on one issue at a time, and not to try to resolve all the issues at once. It doesn't work. So, as I said, this is like human rights, free elections, and other elements of the liberal system is not the impediment for the countries of the region to cooperate with the West. It's the basis of the liberal system itself. The problem is how the West tries to address these issues. So the problem is not with the issues, but with the process of resolving these issues. So I think that this is not the problem. Liberal system is here to stay. We're part of the system, but the West should, design new ways of engaging these countries, not just in our region, but in the world, in the other regions as well, more efficiently, more effectively, because we see that old ways of doing business don't work. Sorry. So maybe it's time to get rid of this legacies of the Cold War era of doing foreign policy and creating new ways of dealing with new challenges based on the understanding that nowadays international relations and everything, actually, the world is far more complex than it was during the Cold War or during the 19th century, and so on and so forth. For instance, I'll give you one example. Let's take two global issues, pandemics and global warming. They are both global, but they are not universal. People don't perceive, for instance, people perceive pandemic as being universal because it touches their life, everyday life. It touches the life of farmer in Texas and touches the life of some tourist guide in Thailand. But like global warming, while it's real and it's a global issue, it's not universal. So how you deal with these issues? Clearly, you have to create new ways of dealing with these issues, and they will be drastically different. You cannot use this just about global issues and how the situation is more complex. And when it comes to region and regional issues, issues that are specific to certain regions, it's even more. The situation is even more complicated. So the U.S. Should take this into account when coming to the region and trying to enhance cooperation or dealing with the regional countries.
Interesting, but can we further develop this very topic about the Western community? Because nowadays, amongst the most talked about and speculated issues is Biden administration's strategy toward Russia and the post-Soviet space in general. What type of strategy do you expect from the United States? Can we expect a robust support from the American side in order to promote and encourage anti-Russian alliances, or they'll be more focused on other issues elsewhere? Fuad? Ayaz? Okay. Ayaz, you go ahead.
Okay. So, Biden administration is new. It's been a couple of months, so we don't know what the Biden administration's real foreign policy toward the region be, because now clearly top priority for the Biden administration so far has been pandemics, and it's understandable. So we have to wait and see what will be the real strategy toward the region. But at the same time, we know that this region won't be not a priority for the Biden administration. The issue will be how to contain China, and of course, within this issue, the main area of concentration focus of Biden administration will be in the Pacific region, and we can see this already based on how National Security Council is organized and who is involved in the National Security Council, particularly Kurt Campbell and others who focus on Indo-Pacific. We also see increased focus on developing Quad, with Asian, with Australia, Japan, India, and also this activities to enlarge the Quad to include Britain, right now, South Caucasus and the wider not priority for the Biden administration, but we also know that based on the recent developments and also, by like Biden's just recent interview where he called Vladimir Putin a killer, we know that U.S. foreign policy is set, on trying ground with Russia. We know that they will cooperate in matters that like START and other that have common security. They have common security interests, but on other areas, we know that there will be a real confrontation between Russia and the U.S. And in this sense, wider Black Sea region will gain, of course, strategic visibility, which will have positive and negative impacts, and it will be up to the countries of the region. How can they minimize the fallout of this confrontation? And how they can maximize this type of conflict and the U.S. So it's too early for now to say something concrete about Biden administration's foreign policy towards the region.
Can I add? So I absolutely agree with Ayaz that the region will not become a priority, but in recent 30 years, the U.S. foreign policy in the region were dependent in, I would say, 5 or 6 variables or lenses. And U.S. foreign policy in the region were designed according to these variables. It was dependent on U.S.-Russian relations, U.S.-Iran relations, U.S.-Turkey relations. Then came the energy issue. Then came after 2001, war in Afghanistan, war against terrorism. Now we might see the United States might add to this basket U.S.-China relations. We will see how United States will place this region in its competition with with China. So unlike we remember that when in 2008-9 Obama came to the power, it declared the reset strategy. So everything started from that. United States withdrew from the region. Перезагрузка in Russian reset strategy, but in this, when Biden came to power, the relations are completely different. In 2008-9, United States, Washington sold dialogue and believe it that the dialogue can produce positive outcome for the relations. But what we see now that and Ayaz mentioned it about the recent, yesterday Biden called the Putin killer, or the report of the national security agencies about the Russians' involvement in election of last year. So we will see that we might expect that there will be growing tension between United States and Russia. In 2008 and 9, we saw how seeking of the dialogue affected the region. So now what we might see that how the growing tension might affect the region. I agree with the Ayaz. It's too early to predict something. We will see and wait.
Thank you both. Against the backdrop of the Western disengagement in the region, we've been discussing there is a vacuum that emerged in the region, which can be filled in by various powers, including Russia and Turkey. To what extent can Eastern Europe play a role in this region? Can Eastern European powers, either independently or as a unified bloc, be proactive in the region, including geopolitical developments, conflict resolution process? How do you see this involvement? Ayaz, maybe? Unmute, please.
As I said in my when I talked about these issues, it's very important to develop, unified security community in the region. So there has to be some cohesion, some common understanding, and some common ground to build upon that. So whether Eastern Europe can, unify as a bloc, or there will be some subdivisions, it all depends on the context, on which issues each region or sub-region faces. But at the same time, as I said, are getting raised because this commercial and physical links are making these subdivisions to get raised. So this Central Eurasian or Eastern European, let's say, region, along with single unit for the European Union to deal with, and for these countries also to develop some common understanding to deal with the external actors. But as I said, it doesn't mean that you have to build, advanced alliance in the region, or you have to have common external threat. But there has to be some common understanding, some trust, and cooperation to enhance that trust. So it will all depend on the issue, on the context. It's very hard because of, as I said, it's a new political equilibrium within this legal system is emerging. It's hard to predict how the final, configuration of the region, of the wider region, will look like. So it's very hard to tell.
Fuad, have you anything to add to what Ayaz just said? Okay. In that case, let me end our today's webinar. I cordially thank both Ayaz and Fuad for their valuable contribution into our discussion. I thank our attendees for putting